The New York Giants have an exciting rookie class, and I'm going to give you 5 players and the first-year expectations for those players on today's Locked On Giants podcast that's coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. Happy Friday to everybody. We made it through the end of another week. We're that much closer to training camp, to kickoff, and it's an exciting time for the New York Giants as they continue with their OTAs. And there's another week or so of OTAs, and then we get into the mandatory mini camp that's coming up, and then everybody goes off on vacation for about 6 weeks or so before the start of training camp. And for training camp, by the way, my understanding is the rookies and select players will be reporting on July 25th, with the rest of the team reporting a couple days later. So anyway, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, speaking of rookies, we're going to talk about year one expectations. And I didn't do the entire rookie class, but what I did do is I picked out some of the draft picks, and I also mixed in an undrafted free agent or two in my list. So I have 5 names I'm going to give you, and I'm going to state what I think the expectations are for these players, how they can potentially help the team. And we'll just see what these young men have in store for the New York Giants, how they will fit in and help the team. So that is today's agenda. Thank you, as always, everybody, for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And a special shout out to my everydayers, as well as to my new people and everybody in between. Love you guys all. Appreciate you. Let's get started with today's podcast. All right. Up first, I'm going to do the draft picks, and got to start with cornerback Deonte Banks, the first round draft pick of the New York Giants in 2023. So if you checked out my OTA report, you saw that Banks moved into the cornerback 2 spot opposite of Adoree Jackson during OTA number 5. Now, in OTA number 3, which was the last, or actually the first OTA this year that the media was allowed in, Banks was actually working with the 2s. He wasn't working with the starters. He has moved into the first string team, which you're kind of expecting, first round pick. You don't want him sitting on the bench. So Banks moving into that starting outside spot, that's where obviously the team wants him to compete. So that being said, what are the expectations for Deonte Banks? Here's the list that I put together. In addition to starting and, being a guy who could potentially play 100% of the snaps on, every week, I think the Giants would probably like to see Banks make some impact plays in terms of interceptions. Now, last year, this is an amazing stat, but only one cornerback came up with an interception all last year. That is just unheard of. And that one cornerback, by the way, Rodarius Williams, is a guy who I don't even think makes the roster this year. That is just a mind-blowing stat. Adoree Jackson, I think, had, I want to say 2 interceptions before, the injuries. Just not a lot of interceptions by the Giants cornerbacks. And that needs to change. Pass breakups are nice and everything, but flipping the field and giving the offense a shorter field, that would be great. Now, here's the thing with Deonte Banks. He wasn't really an interception machine in college. He only had 2 interceptions at the University of Maryland. So I'm going to be curious to see if there is a way that the coaches can maybe scheme him to get more interceptions. Matter of fact, that might be a question I think I'll put to the coaches, if that is possible. If it's just a matter of, being in the right place at the right time, or can the scheme help lead to more interceptions? So I'll put that in my notebook as a question to ask next time we're in the building. What else do we want to see from Deonte Banks? Well, as I mentioned, he's likely going to team with Adoree Jackson as the starters on the outside. And look, that back end of the defense, how many times last year, and it wasn't, this was a result, obviously, of injuries, forcing the team to go down the depth chart and whatnot. But how many times did we see the Giants back end of the defense not hold their coverage? Right. So if they are not holding their coverage long enough and they're allowing opposing quarterbacks to get rid of the ball, that has an adverse effect on the pass rush, which is trying to get to the quarterback. I always say that the front end and the back end of the defense work together when it comes to the pass rush. So think back to all the times the Giants had near sacks, where it looked like they didn't quite finish. That was because in a lot of cases, the back end of the defense just wasn't holding up their end of the bargain. So I would hope that Banks, along with Adoree Jackson, obviously, would do a better job of that this year. Hold on to that coverage with man-to-man coverage, man press, and give the guys up front a chance to wear down their opponents and get to the quarterback. This next item for Deonte Banks is also important, and it's not something that's talked about very often, but it needs to be mentioned. Run defense. We all know how last year the Giants' run defense was just a disaster. It just wasn't very good. Now, you're probably saying, well, that's the fault of the front seven. Well, yeah, but the cornerbacks also have to provide run support, especially if a run gets to the second level. And they really didn't do a good job of that, when that was happening. We know the story about the linebackers and how they struggled. It should be better, obviously, but I'd like to see Banks contribute also in run support. At the University of Maryland, in 686 run defense snaps over his career, the kid had 16 career stops and only 9 missed tackles. Not too bad. So he can definitely play run defense if called upon. He's a solid tackler, doesn't miss very many tackles, like I said. The Giants need that. They need all the support they can get for that run defense, which last year just wasn't very good. So those are the expectations for Deonte Banks. Now let's go to draft pick number 2, which is the second round draft pick, center John Michael Schmitz. All right, the expectations for Schmitz, I would say, pretty straightforward. Number 1, win the starting center job. Now, again, I'm going to go back to my report from yesterday, in which I let you guys know that Schmitz was working mainly with the starting offense, the first string offense, whereas in OTA number 3, Ben Bredesen was getting some of those snaps. So the Giants, nothing is set, jobs aren't won or lost right now in the springtime, but I'd like to think that this means that John Michael Schmitz is ahead of schedule in terms of his learning curve. And if he is, that's what you want to see, obviously. You want him starting on day 1. You want Daniel Jones to start getting used to having the same center, week in, week out, and not only week in and week out, but over the next several years, because this revolving center door just has to stop. All right, some other things for John Michael Schmitz. Last year, the Giants' interior offensive line was not very stout when it came to pass protections. There were far too many pressures coming up the gut. Now, I don't know if that was a result of line calls. I think it was more of a result of guys just not anchoring and not, getting a piece of their man. So I'd like to see, the leaks that were sprung up the middle of the offensive line stop. And with John Michael Schmitz at the University of Minnesota, he allowed just 21 quarterback pressures and 991 pass blocking snaps and just 2 sacks. Not too bad. By comparison, John Feliciano, the starting center last year, 25 quarterback pressures and 4 sacks. So again, key things, making the correct line calls and just orchestrating things, working in tandem on double team blocks, solo blocks when you have a guy lining up over you on the nose, just keeping the middle part of the pocket clean, which the Giants did not do a very good job of. Another thing I want to mention regarding John Michael Schmitz, much has been made about the dead ball snap and how Daniel Jones is okay with it, and they're going to experiment with it and potentially use it in the regular season. Schmitz is pretty good at that, having executed it at Minnesota. And there's actually an advantage to using the dead ball snap. And that advantage is that it's a little quicker in getting the ball into the quarterback's hands. Now, you might not notice it on tape, but that split second that they gain can help expedite things, allow for Daniel to drop back and get the ball into the hands of the receivers that much quicker before the defense has a chance to react. So if they can get John Michael Schmitz in there, if they stick with the dead ball snap, that's going to be important. The dead ball snap, as long as it's accurate, it's quicker, it's cleaner, and it will allow the offense to fire on all cylinders a little bit faster than a traditional snap that you would see from a center. All right, coming up next, I've got Jalin Hyatt and Eric Gray I want to talk about, so don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, get in on all the sports action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500 back in bonus bets if their first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. FanDuel offers great promotions, a safe and secure app to set your bets, and instant payouts. Make every moment more with FanDuel, Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we are just rolling right along. We're going to continue with 5 days a week coverage next week. I'm actually going to do, amongst the topics that I have, I'm going to take a look at year 2 players and what the expectations are. And then I'm going to do another show, year 3 plus players and their expectations. So it's a little series that I'm doing here, but I hope you enjoy it. And as always, if you have thoughts about, what your expectations are for the players that I mentioned, drop them in the comment box if you're watching on YouTube, or send me an email. Also next week, the Giants have another OTA that's going to be open to the media. That will be on Thursday. So I will be there. I will have a show for you as soon as I can after I get back from that OTA. So we're just continuing our coverage of the New York Giants spring football, and I hope you're enjoying it. I know I am. I'm having a great old time, watching how this team is experimenting with different looks and personnel packages. And I'm trying to bring you all those details, as well as some other cool stuff to satisfy your need for Giants news and stuff. So thank you again for tuning in. Let's get back to the program here. I want to talk about 2 other draft picks. I'm not doing the entire draft class. I'm just doing like the guys that I think are going to really step up and have a role, a significant role. So next up on my list is wide receiver Jalin Hyatt. Now, Jalin Hyatt's an interesting guy. In Tennessee, he was primarily a slot receiver, a yards after the catch specialist. Also a guy who the bulk of his receptions were in the short range. So it was basically get the ball in his hands and let him take off. So 93.3% catch rate last year alone on passes between 0 and 9 yards. And he averaged 8.9 yards after the catch on those with 0 drops. Hyatt, of course, in addition to, running those short routes and, picking up yards after the catch, he's got enough speed to break open deep down the field. Just imagine the speed that this kid brings and whether, he can actually get behind some of these defenders. So I'm pretty excited about what this kid could bring. I don't think he's just going to be a short yardage type of specialist. I think he's going to be someone who they can call upon if they want to stretch the field and try the deep ball. And again, I've been talking about it for the last 2 OTA reports. The Giants are throwing deep a lot more. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I agree. What we see in the spring doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make it into the playbook come the summertime. Right now is the time for the coaches to experiment, but they're doing a lot of experimentation. And look, I think we can all agree that this team, which finished last in the NFL in deep pass plays of 20 plus yards, they had 28, by the way, they need more explosive plays. Jalin Hyatt can bring that to the offense. So it's not just going to be a Paris Campbell, Darren Waller, Darius Slayton, running those deep patterns. They're going to put multiple guys on the field. And good luck to posing defenses in trying to figure out who you're going to double, who you're going to single, who you're going to bump, and just how you're going to play it. Because now the Giants have some options, which they haven't had in quite a long time. So Jalin Hyatt can bring that to this team. And you know what? This is a young man who's really learning, picking up the playbook rapidly. I spoke to someone yesterday about Hyatt. I said, how's he coming along in the classroom? And I was told that he is smart, that this offense that the Giants run, it's not easy to pick up, but this kid seems to be taking to it like a duck in water. So that is promising news for the Giants and that passing game, on which I think the team is going to depend a lot more so than maybe the run game. All right. Next up, let's talk running back Eric Gray. Now, the thing with young running backs is when they first get to the NFL, can they pass protect? Because if they can't pass block, they ain't getting on the field. It's that simple. You don't want to have a guy on the field and he whiffs and, oh my God, now the quarterback gets, drilled into the ground. You don't want to have that. Eric Gray, though, I think has the build and the skill set to do pass blocking. But more importantly, I think the expectations for him is giving Saquon Barkley, who will eventually show up, by the way. I don't know when, but he will show up. He will play this year. Giving Barkley some snaps in relief. Eric Gray averaged 5.6 yards per carry. He also was a pretty good receiver out of the backfield, 8.4 yards per reception. So, I know you're thinking, okay, well, they have Matt Breida in front of him. Well, Matt Breida is going to get his share of snaps, but I think if Eric Gray can show that he can pass protect, I would not be surprised if maybe Eric Gray starts to overtake Matt Breida for some of those snaps in relief of Saquon, or some of those snaps that maybe will feature him and Saquon on the field at the same time. I mentioned pass pro. Eric Gray allowed 11 pressures in 127 pass blocks and no sacks allowed in his last 2 seasons. So the kid, again, has shown that he can hold his own in pass protection, but the NFL level, of course, a much different animal. So we'll have to see how well he holds up in that regard. But Eric Gray, look, he could catch out of the backfield. He can run the ball. You've got that versatility, which again opens up a lot of possibilities if you're offensive coordinator Mike Kafka. So I think that's what the Giants are looking for in terms of contributions from Eric Gray. Oh, by the way, he can also play on special teams for them. He was one of actually the kickoff return guys, fielding the kickoff returns during OTA number 5. I don't know if he's going to necessarily get that job. It's still too early. And I know a lot of you, are, kind of cringe when you hear who's, back there fielding punts or kickoffs. Doesn't mean anything right now. It just means that they're practicing it because of the different spin of the ball. It doesn't mean that, Eric Gray is going to be the kickoff returner or Adoree Jackson, the punt returner. It's just practice right now. The real test and indication is going to come when we get to the preseason game. So don't get too, worked up over that, folks. All right. Coming up next, my one UDFA to make the list. Tell you about him next. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I have one more player, one more rookie whom I'm going to speak about regarding what the potential expectations are for him in year one. I also have a question that was submitted to me via the YouTube channel that I want to answer before I close out the show. But before I do that, just a reminder, we still have that open enrollment for our subtext community where you get an opportunity to receive exclusive text messages from yours truly. And it's also an opportunity for you to communicate with me directly. And, so far we've been running this program now for a couple of weeks, and I really like it because a lot of you who have signed up for it have taken advantage of texting me questions or just, texting me your thoughts on stuff. And you know what? It gets in front of me. Unlike with email, which unfortunately, I don't know why this is, but sometimes when you email me, it lands in my spam message folder. And unless I go into my spam folder, which I do once a week, sometimes I miss questions and I feel bad about that. I don't know how to fix that. But certainly, this is a way, this text message community is a way to avoid that. And right now you can try it out for free for 14 days. And if you like it, you can continue with our special 2 months for the price of one offer with the promo code PTRAIN. So basically the price per month is $4.99. But if you use that promo code, you get 2 months for the price of one. So it comes out to $250 per month. And trust me, folks, we're going to ramp that up once we get into summer training camp. So it's a good time to take advantage of that offer right now. And anytime you want to cancel, you can cancel and owe nothing. It's no obligation. You don't have to sign up, for a full year or anything like that. You come and go as you please. And in doing so, you're also supporting the Locked On Giants podcast, which is always appreciated. So check it out. Details are in the show notes along with the link if you want to click to get more information or sign up. All right. So we have one more rookie that I want to talk about as far as expectation goes. And then I want to answer a question that was submitted to me on the YouTube comments section that I happened to catch, when I was preparing the notes for today's show. So let's get into it. The rookie that I want to talk about is undrafted free agent Bryce Ford-Wheaton. Now, this is a guy a lot of you have asked me about. You're like, what are you seeing from him? What's he showing? What are his chances of making the roster and so on and so forth? And I think that interest comes because Ford-Wheaton was given over, I think it's like $230,000 guaranteed, which is a full year's or more than a full year's practice squad salary. So obviously a lot of you are like, okay, well, the Giants must have big expectations for him. And they do. So what can they potentially expect from Ford-Wheaton if he makes the roster? And that receiver group, by the way, jam-packed. So who I think is going to make the roster, that's a topic for another show on another day. And we will do that show at some point. But let's pretend for a moment that Ford-Wheaton does make the roster. What would be the expectations? I would say they probably would like to see him have at least a 60% catch rate. All right. For his college career, 57% in his college career. A big problem with Ford-Wheaton has been drops, which has to be eliminated from his game. So he had 18 total in his career, 6 of which happened last year. Now, if Ford-Wheaton can clean that up, the Giants just might indeed have something. And, OTA number 5, I saw the young man make a spectacular catch with a defender on him. I also saw him have a ball go right through his hands with no defender on him. So you just can't have that inconsistency because it could be maddening. So I think that's something, obviously, the Giants are going to want to work with Ford-Wheaton to clean up, is those concentration drops or those misses or whatnot. And it looked to me like, on the one that went through his hands, he was ready to turn up field and run with it before he secured it. And that reminds me of so many young receivers that have come through the doors. They're so anxious to catch the ball, turn up field, that they don't actually look the ball in. secure it, and then run upfield. So, that's a common problem with young receivers. All right. The other thing that's very intriguing about Ford-Wheaton is that he's got the size and the ability for contested catches. So in college, he had a 49.3% contested catch rate. That's not too bad. That's not too bad for a receiver. Anything, 50% and upwards, that's pretty good. But, with Ford-Wheaton, I think the big appeal with him, besides, the size and the skill set, is not only does he have the ability to make the contested catches, but the yards after the catch. So over his career, he had 1,867 yards, 800 of which came after the catch. So in Ford-Wheaton, you're basically getting a guy who can do it all potentially for you, and who could also maybe, has the speed to run some of those jet sweeps that the Giants sometimes like to run. So there's a lot to like about Ford-Wheaton. And I think, if he makes the roster, obviously, the yards after the catch are going to be an expectation. Cutting down on the drops, that's going to be an expectation. But this is a guy who could potentially give the Giants a lot of different options to, on offense. And he's definitely somebody, to keep an eye on this summer. So we'll see how it plays out with him, but certainly an intriguing player. And you can see why the Giants were so anxious to get him and make sure they keep him with, the guaranteed money, for the practice squad. So we'll see how that plays out. All right. Now, I said that I had one question that was submitted to me on the YouTube channel that I wanted to answer. And I apologize to the person who asked it because I didn't write down the person's name. I just wrote down what the question was. So I apologize to that person, but I think that person said he was an everydayer. So I'm so sorry. I know that's not a great way to treat my everydayers, but I'll see if I can find the name and, send you a message on the YouTube message boards. But anyway, the question was, can you explain the new kickoff rule and the significance to the Giants and the NFL for that matter? All right. So the new kickoff rule, as I understand it, is that a kickoff returner can signal for a fair catch anywhere inside of his 25-yard line. And that would automatically place the ball at the 25-yard line. So it's kind of like, how last year, if a guy caught the ball, a kickoff in the end zone, and he kneeled, it was considered a touchback and the ball was spotted on the 25. Now it's like, okay, if you signal for a fair catch anywhere between the goal line or the end zone rather, and the 25-yard line, you're still going to get that benefit. I don't like the rule because it's like, how many kickoff returners, do you stop? There were times if you have a good coverage team and you could stop a guy inside your 25 or inside their 25, I should say. I just feel that it takes away from, the game. And, you just get the impression that more and more they're going to try and eliminate kickoffs. Now, this rule is only in place for 1 year. They're going to try it out, see how it works. But it's not hard to see why special teams coordinators don't like it and the players don't like it. It's under the guise of player safety. But I'm sorry, you want to promote player safety, then get rid of the Thursday night games. Get rid of, the flex scheduling where you have these guys at random. Oh, now all of a sudden you've got to play an extra game or you got to move games. Or that's where you want to get rid of, if you're that serious about player safety. But of course, we all know that's not how the NFL works. So that is how I understand the new kickoff rule to work. And I asked at the OTA number 3, I asked Brian Dable about that. I said, how does, the new rules that were approved by the competition committee, how does that affect maybe how you plan or how you, what you look for in players? And Dable kind of gave me a generic answer saying that, look, we have to understand it first before we could teach it. So that's a question I'm going to raise to Thomas McGahee, the special teams coordinator, because, I think that's a better question for him. I have a feeling T-Mac doesn't like the rule either. I don't know a lot of people who do. So that's the rule as I understand it. And I believe it was taken from the college ranks. So it just cuts down on strategy. I mean, kickoff returns can basically flip the field. And now, you can put anybody back there. I mean, I could go back there and call for fair catches all the time and not have to worry about getting nailed. But, if you have a fast person back there, I don't know, it just takes away from the game. And this guy's a player safety. Look, I'm all for player safety, but I just think that, they're approaching it from angles that maybe they should look at other angles if they want to improve player safety. So that's my take on it. That's the explanation as I understand it. We'll see how it does this year. Again, it's on a 1-year trial. Hopefully it doesn't pass and come back next year, because I just don't like it. And I know a lot of people who don't like it. So, all right, everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Tune in next week. Again, I'm going to have a rundown on year 2 players and their expectations. And then I'm going to do another show on year 3 players, year 3 plus players and their expectations. We've got OTA number 9 coming up next week on Thursday. So we'll have a show on that, and we'll see what else pops in, into the radar. So plenty more to come here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody, and we'll see you again on Monday.